Hello, I will be starting with a short general review before I go into a more in-depth spoiler review. So to start with this movie, its animation was absolutely stunning. It was so fluid and detailed, even more than usual from a Ghibli film, which is saying a lot. The framing of each scene was immersive and the colors were eye-catching and beautiful. Not to mention we were treated to a lot of lovely scenes of just taking in the scenery and thinking, and Joe Hisaishi really outdid himself with the soundtrack for this movie. I would highly recommend listening to it. It really complements the movie. The movie was really emotional too, but I was surprised too to find myself laughing at a lot of certain scenes, and I fell in love with the Heron. He was an amazing character. The movie has darker undertones too, which enhances the overall message. Okay, now let's get into the spoilers. This movie is interesting because it takes us back to the end days of World War II in Japan. Hayao Miyazaki's first memories come from this time, and I could tell the film was very personal to him. In the film, Mahito's father runs a plane factory, whilst Mahito's mother is sick, not too dissimilar to Miyazaki's own life. The film is anti-war. We see the pain it brings upon Mahito for the death of his mother, and we see anti-war imagery. Early in the film, Mahito and Natsuko stop to watch a procession congratulating someone for being enlisted into the military, but it is a solemn image and reflects more on Japan for pushing this war than for anything glorious. The soldier at the front attempts to project a strong man image, while Mahito looks more gentle. But this film isn't only about the war itself, it's about the entirety of humanity. This film examines a similar issue to Miyazaki's last film, The Wind Rises, that being that everything is beautiful yet cursed. The film doesn't go for the message that the world has good and bad people. It shows instead that people committing acts of good can be of great harm to others, and that those committing terrible acts are in the service of something good. This is seen when Himi saves the Warawaras. She ignites the sky. Otherwise, the Warawaras will all be eaten by the pelicans before they can make it to the next world. However, Mahito is then confronted after this act by one of the pelicans, left bloodied and dying from Himi's actions. The pelican asks nothing but to be put out of his misery. Mahito asks the pelican why he eats the Warawaras, and the pelican reveals that it is their only way to survive. They were put into a world where they couldn't eat most things, and their children could no longer fly. The pelicans have no other choice if they are to live. This reveals the terrible truth of all living things, including humans. The world made us monsters, but there's nothing we can do about it. We must eat other living things in order to survive. Simultaneously, we have a world filled with beautiful things and cute things, like the Rawa Rawa, but at the same time filled with violence and disorder. In the film, we have Mahito's granduncle, a man who has been creating his own world in a desperate effort to create something without malice and pain. But his efforts cannot be brought to fruition. He has to keep putting the world together, but it never works. He then asks Mahito to be his successor and piece together a new world without malice. But Mahito declines, and from his journey we can see why. At the beginning of the film, Mahito rushes to a burning hospital to help save his mother, but she dies in the flames. Mahito is crushed by losing someone he loves so much. When Mahito is confronted with Natsuko, it is still too soon for him to accept all that has happened to him. It's hard for him to receive the same motherly love from a different source. For him, it is almost a betrayal, especially by his father to move on and be with this woman. Mahito's father is attempting to take care of him and treat him well. However, Mahito doesn't respond much to his father. He is lacking the love that he had had in his life and is hurting. I really love the scene when Mahito first arrives at his new house. He is exhausted by everything that has happened, a lost mother and now a new home. He falls asleep on his bed almost immediately, but then he starts having a dream of the hospital burning down. For one thing, I really love how fast-paced and distorted this scene is. The thing about art is not only to show us what is real, but to show us what it feels like, and the confused desperation and terror really comes through the animation. But there aren't enough words to describe every feeling this movie gives me, and the feeling this movie makes me feel may not be the same for you, but that is okay, and this is why I will kind of leave it out there. Anyway, this dream causes Mahito to start crying, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. He is a child in an unfamiliar place surrounded by people he doesn't know well. This is where the film shows some of its more darker elements, but I really appreciate that Miyazaki went there to examine these feelings. Mahito commits an act of self-harm in order to escape his situation. He cannot handle his new school, and he sees the adults in his life as not being understanding of his condition. Even though the adults in his life do know what he is going through, they have gone back to positivity too quickly for Mahito. Mahito needs to just be sad. I hope that Miyazaki understands that kids and younger people are going through a wide range of emotions too, that many may not be particularly conducive to. This act leaves a scar on Mahito's forehead, one that he carries for the rest of the movie, one that his grand-uncle's world reveals. Before that, though, he reads the book How Do You Live, left to him by his mother. There is some intertextuality here. How Do You Live, the book, and this movie are completely different, but they both ask the same question of how do we live in this world, one that is simultaneously shaped by violence and love. What gets me though is when Mahito starts crying while reading the book, his tears landing on the pages. I cannot be sure, but I have read the book, and judging by the illustration we see, at this page in the book the character of Copper is reunited with his friends after he abandoned them to be bullied by the older students. Copper had felt very guilty of his actions, but fell into a terrible sickness. He then went on to fear that his friends would hate him for not being there for them, but his friends are forgiving and accept him back with open arms. Similarly, Mahito had been distant with Natsuko, who wanted to see him but couldn't because of her sickness. Mahito only briefly interacts with her before leaving just as quickly as he arrived. But when he finally interacts with Natsuko again, hoping to bring her back, she reacts by telling Mahito she hates him, not because she does, but because she wants Mahito to leave that dangerous world and not get stuck there because of her. But what is shown too is that Mahito wants friends, people that will accept and love him. The book How Do You Live teaches morals to children as well. And the book was a takedown of nationalism too, but done secretly because of the censors in place at the time it was written. The older schoolboys in the book represent the over-nationalist faction of Japan, harming those below them for not being nationalist enough, or in their case not being loyal enough to the school. Mahito seems to take these lessons to heart. Mahito and the Heron have many disagreements, but despite the war and sorrow, Mahito is not a violent person. He is respectful and always gives his thanks. One of my favorite scenes is Mahito fixing the hole in the Heron's beak. Mahito doesn't hold the Heron's injury as leverage, and fixes it. The Heron then immediately betrays Mahito, before realizing that his injury isn't fixed right. Then Mahito fixes it again despite the fact the Heron had just said he was no longer willing to help after that. To Mahito, the moral is to fix the injury and not expect much in return. That is more important. However, the Heron becomes thankful enough that he goes with Mahito for the rest of his journey. The world that Mahito goes in is filled with friends and family encompassing different times. The Heron becomes his new friend, and he meets with Kiriko and his mother from different times. The thing I love is that everyone is watching over him, even when he doesn't realize it, especially Natsuko. It's a very beautiful message that even in Mahito's darkest moments, there are people there for him. One of my favorite scenes is towards the end of the movie. Lady Himi is Mahito's mother, and while they are leaving, Mahito warns her that she will die in a hospital fire. But Himi tells Mahito how much she loves him, and that she will go back for him. This expression of love is what Mahito needed to hear, and for him to have just another moment with his mother was beautiful. This scene brought the whole film together in a way that made it perfect. It makes sense then why Mahito didn't take the responsibility in taking over his granduncle's world. Mahito tells him that he's incapable of creating a world without malice, since he himself has malice. He was the one who injured himself. Mahito is not perfect. He accepts that. He, like any human, has feelings that are ugly, but we can't rid ourselves of them. But we can try to understand and mitigate them. The world is a terrible place, but this film has one more thing. It deals with lies and truth, life and death. Everything the Heron says is a lie and a truth. It's a paradox like the world, a beautiful yet awful place. Yet even Mahito is happy to see the survival of the pelicans, and even the king parakeet is just a parakeet. We are simultaneously good and bad, but the one thing that can keep us together and keep us happy is simply love.